The dog showed up at the bottom of the stairwell at 6 in the morning, soaked through and shivering, and the woman who knelt down to help it had exactly 9 days left before she lost the only home her daughter had ever known. She did not know that yet, not the part about the dog. She knew about the 9 days because the notice taped to her door had spelled it out in the flat language of a system that did not care who read it, and she had read it 40 times, the way you keep pressing on a bruise to see if it still hurts. What she did not know was that the small trembling animal pressed against the cinder block wall belonged to a man who in 11 days would sit at a long table on the 14th floor of a building she had never been inside, with her file open in front of him, and decide whether a mother and a child kept their roof or lost it. She did not know any of that. She only knew the dog was cold, and that no living thing should be that cold, and that was enough. Her name was Renee Carter, and she was 34 years old, and she had been awake since 4 because the second job started at 4:30 and the bus did not wait. She worked mornings cleaning the offices of a dental practice on Sutter and afternoons at a laundromat off the same line, folding other people's worn clothes for $9 an hour, while her own coat had a zipper that had given up 2 winters ago. She had a daughter named Maya, who was 8, who slept with one arm thrown over a stuffed rabbit that had lost an eye, who did not yet know that the word eviction meant anything other than a hard sound her mother said quietly into the phone. Renee meant to keep it that way as long as she could. A child should not have to carry what a grown woman could barely lift. So when the dog appeared, she almost stepped past it. She was late. She was always late. Late in the way that costs people money they do not have, and she had learned to move through the world fast and small, taking up no room, asking for nothing. Then the dog looked up at her with the particular helplessness of something that has been loved and then lost. And she stopped. It was a brown and white spaniel of some kind, well fed under the wet, with a collar that had slid halfway around its neck. She crouched. She did not have a treat. She did not have a leash. She had 11 minutes before the bus, and she gave them away without a second thought because that was simply how she was built, and that fact, more than any other, is what this story is about. Maybe you have done that. Maybe you have stopped when you could not afford to stop, given what you could not spare, because a thing in front of you needed it more than you needed to keep moving. If you have, you already know what kind of woman Renee was. Stay with her. It matters how this ends. The dog let her lift it. That told her something, that it trusted hands, that someone had been gentle with it. She turned the collar until the tag came up into the grey light, a small brass disc worn smooth at the edges, and on it was a name, Biscuit, and a phone number, and nothing else. No address, no second number. Just a name, person had chosen with affection, and a way to be called home. Renee tucked the dog inside her broken coat against her own warmth, and she missed the bus. She stood at the stop and watched it pull away with its lit windows and its dry seats, and she felt the cold metal of being late settle into her stomach, and she held the dog tighter. Anyway, she called the number from the stop. It rang and went to a voicemail that was just a recorded voice reading the digits back. No name, the kind of greeting a careful man leaves. She said who she was, where she was, that she had his dog and it was safe and warm, and she left her own number twice, slowly, so he would not miss it. Then she walked the dog the 8 blocks back up to her apartment, climbed the stairs, she might soon be climbing for the last time, and put it on a towel by the radiator that worked when it felt like it. She had nothing to feed, a dog. She broke an egg into a bowl and set it down and watched the animal eat like it had been days. And she thought, with the plain arithmetic that ran under everything in her life now, that the egg had been part of Maya's breakfast and that she would figure out the rest later, the way she figured out everything later. She was 40 minutes late to the dental office. Her supervisor, a tired woman named Gloria, who was not unkind but was watched by people above her, met her at the door and did not quite look at her. There had been a conversation already that month about reliability. Renee said she was sorry. She did not explain about the dog because, in her experience, explanations sounded like excuses to the people who held your hours in their hands, and excuses cost more than silence. She cleaned faster than she ever had. She wiped down the chairs and emptied the bins and ran the vacuum over. the same carpet she ran it over every morning, and the whole time a part of her mind sat back at the apartment with a brown and white dog asleep by a radiator, and she let herself feel, for one strange warm minute, that she had done something good in a week that had been nothing but loss. She did not know how good. She could not have guessed. That was a Tuesday. The notice on her door was dated the 1st of the month, and it gave her until the end of it, and it carried the name of a property management company, and, below that, in smaller print, the name of the man who held the final say on hardship appeals. The person to whom tenants could write before the date became real. Renee had written him. She had sat at the kitchen table after Maya was asleep, with the lamp pulled low so the light would not reach the bedroom, and she had written by hand because her phone was the only screen she owned and the letters came out wrong on it. She had not begged. Something in her would not let her beg. She had laid it out plain, the 2 jobs, the daughter, the month she had paid in full before the laundromat cut her hours. The back rent she could clear in 90 days if they would only let her. She had signed it with her whole name and folded it into an envelope and walked it to the management office herself, rather than trust it to the mail. And she had heard nothing, and the days had kept falling off the calendar like leaves. The man who would read that letter was named Walter Hayes, and he was 58 years old, and he had buried his wife 14 months before, and the dog that had run off in the rain that morning was the last living thing in his house that had known her. He did not know yet that a stranger had it. He had spent the morning, the way he spent most mornings now, walking the same blocks, calling a name into the cold, his good coat soaked, a flashlight in his hand though the sun was up, because the house had become unbearable without the click of small nails on the floor. Biscuit had bolted through a gap in the side gate during the night, chasing something or nothing, and Walter had not slept since he noticed the open door at 5. He had built 3 buildings and managed 40 more and sat on boards that decided the futures of people he never met, and that morning he would have traded all of it for a brown and white spaniel to come trotting back up his driveway. He did not get his phone out of his coat until almost noon, when he came in shaking and defeated to make coffee. He would not drink, and he saw the message, and he sat down hard in a kitchen chair and listened to a woman's voice tell him his dog was safe and warm and waiting. He called her back 4 times before she could answer, because she was at the laundromat by then, wrists deep in a tangle of someone else's sheets, and she could not get to the phone. When she finally heard it ring on her break and saw the same number, her heart did a small, frightened thing, because in Renee's life an unknown number calling back usually meant a bill, a collector, a problem with a name and a deadline. She answered carefully. The voice on the other end was older and unsteady in a way she did not expect from a man, and it said, "I think you have my dog," and then it could not say anything else for a moment. She told him yes. She told him the dog was fine, that it had eaten, that it was sleeping when she left. She heard the man breathe out like something inside him had been holding a door shut, and the door had finally given. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you. You have no idea." And she said it was nothing, the way she always said it was nothing, and arranged for him to come by that evening after her shift. And she did not know that she had just spoken on the phone to the man who held her home in his hands. There was no reason she would know. His name had been small print on a notice. His voice was just a grateful old man on a Tuesday. Walter came to her building at 7 that evening in a car worth more than Renee would earn in 3 years, and he did not notice the car, and neither, for a different reason, did she. She did not know cars. He parked it at the curb in front of a building with a cracked entry light and a buzzer panel, half of which did not work, and he climbed the stairs she climbed every day, past the smell of other people's dinners and the sound of a television through a thin wall. And when she opened the door, the dog came off the towel like a shot and hit his legs and turned in circles and made a sound that was almost human, and Walter Hayes got down on his knees on the worn floor of a stranger's apartment in his good wool coat and put his face into the fur of his dog and wept, and did not care that anyone saw. Rennie stood back and let him have it. She knew what it was to hold the last warm piece of something you had lost. Maya peeked out from the bedroom doorway in her pajamas, and the dog saw her and went to her too, and the child laughed, that bright, unguarded laugh that Renee had been hearing less and less as the month wore on, and her mother's worry filled the small rooms like a smell, and for a second the apartment was full of something it had not held in a long time. Walter wiped his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed, and stood. He looked around the apartment, then really looked the way a man looks when he is trying to understand a person from the few things they own. He saw the egg bowl, washed and drying. He saw a child's drawings taped to the refrigerator. He saw a coat with a broken zipper hung by the door, and he saw, though Renee moved too late to turn it over, the corner of a notice on the kitchen table, the kind of document Walter Hayes had read 10,000 times, and he knew its colour and its shape the way you know the face of an old enemy, and something in his chest went very still. He did not say anything about it. Not then. He was a careful man, and he had learned in a long life that you do not embarrass people in their own homes, and he could see that this woman did not yet connect his grateful face to the cold machinery of an eviction, and he was not ready to be that to her. Not in this room, with his dog warm and her child laughing. So he reached into his coat for his wallet and took out what he had, which was several $100s in cash, and he held it out to her and he said, "Please, for your trouble, for the food, please." And Renee Carter, who had 9 days left before she lost her home, who had given a child's egg to a stranger's dog, who could have cleared 2 weeks of her panic with that money, looked at it and shook her head and said, "No, I didn't do it for that." He stood there with the money in his hand, and he did not understand. And then slowly he did. He had spent his life among people who did things for that. The whole architecture of his world ran on for that. He had forgotten, in the way the comfortable forget, that there were people for whom kindness was not a transaction, for whom you held a cold thing, because it was cold, and that was the entire reason, and the only reason. He put the money away. He felt, standing in that small kitchen, more ashamed than he had felt in years, and he could not have told you exactly why. He thanked her again, more quietly this time. He gathered up his dog. At the door he paused, and he looked at the child, and he looked at the mother, and he said something he did not plan to say, which was, "You have a good home here." And Renee, who had been told by a piece of paper that she did not, who had 9 days, smiled a tired smile and said, "We like it." And Walter went down the stairs into the cold with his dog and his unspent money and a feeling he could not name. And he did not sleep that night either, but it was a different kind of not sleeping. Here is the thing about a man like Walter Hayes. He had become, over the years, very good at not seeing. It is a skill the comfortable acquire without meaning to. You sign the document and you do not picture the kitchen. You approve the action and you do not hear the child laugh. The file says back rent and a number and a date. And the file is true, and the file is also a coat with a broken zipper and an egg given away and a name worn smooth on a brass tag. And the file does not tell you any of that, and you do not ask, because asking would make the work impossible, and the work has to be done. Walter had read 1,000 hardship letters, and he had felt the appropriate, manageable, professional amount of sympathy for each, and he had signed where signing was warranted, and he had gone home to a wife who loved him, and a dog who met him at the door. And he had been, he believed, a fair man. Fair. He turned the word over now, in the dark. He had been fair the way a scale is fair, weighing what is placed on it, and nothing else, blind to everything that does not have a weight. He had Renee's letter. Wah! He realized that somewhere around 2 in the morning, he had not connected the name when he heard her voice because he did not read the letters by listening. He read them as text in a stack, but now he got up and went to the study where the appeal file sat in a folder he was meant to review before the hearing, and he opened it, and there it was, her whole careful hand. Renee Carter, the 2 jobs, the daughter, 8 years old, named in the letter the way you name the thing you are fighting for, the 90 days she swore she could make it right in. The signature, her full name, the same name the voicemail had spoken into his phone 12 hours before. Walter sat in the study with the letter in his hands and the dog asleep across his feet, the dog she had warmed with her own body and fed with her child's breakfast. And he understood that the woman who had refused his money was the woman whose home he had been about to take. Now, a smaller man, a man who had let the not seeing go all the way down to the bone, might have felt only the inconvenience of it, the awkwardness, and might have found a way to keep the 2 facts in separate rooms, the grateful dog owner and the delinquent tenant, and signed anyway, because the file was still true. Walter, though, had spent 14 months learning what it costs to lose the thing that loves you, and that morning he had walked the cold, calling a name, and that evening a poor woman had given him back his whole heart and asked for nothing, and he found he could not put those rooms apart anymore. He sat there a long time. Outside the window, the city went on with its lit and unlit windows, thousands of them, and behind some uncountable number of them were people doing what Renee did, holding on by their fingernails, paying in full until the month they could not, and he had been the date on the notice for more of them than he wanted to count. He did not feel in that moment like a fair man. He felt like a man who had been handed a mirror by someone who did not even know she was holding it. He could have called her then. He did not. He understood, with the same care that had kept him from naming the notice in her kitchen, that there was a wrong way to do this. He could have phoned her and told her who he was and watched her face fall, watched her recalculate every kind word she had said to him, watched the warm thing between them curdle into the old transaction she had refused. He could have made his guilt her problem. Instead, he made a decision that he would carry it himself, that he would fix what he could without making her perform gratitude for it, and that whatever he did, she would not have to find out that the dog she saved had been the only reason, because she had not done it for a reason, and he would not turn her gift into a debt. He owed her that. He owed her the dignity of having it stay a gift. The hearing was set for the following Thursday on the 14th floor in a conference room with a long table and a view Renee would never have seen if her life had gone differently. She did not know Walter would be in the room. She had received a single line of correspondence, a notice that her appeal would be heard, with a date and a time and a floor. And she had taken the morning off from the dental office at a cost she could not afford, and she had ironed the one blouse she owned that looked like something, and she had walked Maya to school and told her nothing, only that she had grown-up things to do downtown, and she had gotten on the bus with her letter in a folder held against her chest like armor. She did not pray for much. She had learned not to ask the sky for too much, because the asking and the not getting was its own kind of wound. She asked only for 90 days, just the time to make it right. She had the math, she had a plan. She needed someone with the power to say yes, to hear her say it. She rode the elevator up alone, and her stomach dropped with the speed of it, and the doors opened onto a hallway with carpet so thick her tired feet sank into it, and she walked past glass offices where people who decided things sat behind clean desks, and she felt the particular shame of the poor in the houses of the comfortable, the sense that her very body was an intrusion, that she had tracked something in. A young assistant showed her to the conference room and offered her water, and she said no thank you because she was afraid of needing the bathroom and afraid of the sound the bottle would make in the quiet. She sat at the end of the long table with her folder in front of her, and she waited, and her heart was loud in her ears. And then the door opened and Walter Hayes walked in a charcoal suit instead of a wet wool coat, and Renee's whole understanding of the last week turned over in a single second. She knew his face before she understood why she knew it. The way you sometimes do, a wrongness in the room, a piece that does not fit, and then it fit all at once, and the fitting was terrible. The man who had wept on her floor. The man whose dog had eaten her daughter's egg. The man she had told, "We like it," about a home a piece of paper said she could not keep. He was the name, in the small print. He was the date. He had been in her kitchen, and he had known. He must have known, and the warmth she had felt drained out of her and left something cold and humiliated in its place, because Renee Carter had spent her whole life careful not to ask the wealthy for anything, and now she understood that she had let one into her home, fed his dog, refused his money out of pride, and the whole time he had been the one holding the knife. She felt the floor of her composure give way. She thought, he saw the notice. He let me say we like it. She did not know whether to stand or run, and she did neither. She sat very still, the way she had taught herself to sit still through every hard thing, and she waited to be told she had lost. Walter saw all of it cross her face, and it was worse than he had braced for. He saw the recognition, and then the betrayal, and then the shame, the awful shame of a proud person realizing they had been pitted, and he understood that whatever he had planned to say was the wrong thing to say first. So he did not sit at the head of the table. He pulled out the chair beside her, the way you sit beside a person and not across from them, and he set down the folder he carried. And before anyone else in the room could begin the cold procedure of the thing, he said quietly, just to her, Mrs. Pleat, "Carter, I owe you an apology, and I owe you the truth, and I am going to give you both, and then I am going to tell you what I should have done a long time ago." The two other people in the room, a woman from the management company and a man with a laptop, looked up because this was not how these went. Walter did not look at them. He told Renee that he was sorry, that he had recognized the notice in her kitchen and had not had the courage to name it, that he had not wanted to be that to her in front of her child. He told her that he had read her letter, that he had it in front of him, that it was the clearest and most honest hardship letter he had read in years, and that she had been right about all of it, the 90 days, the math, the plan. He told her that the dog she had warmed and fed was named Biscuit and had belonged to his wife who had died, and that on the morning she found it, he had been walking the streets ready to give anything to have it back, and that she had given it back and asked for nothing, and that he had stood in her kitchen and offered her money and she had refused it, and that in 40 years of business no one had ever made him feel so clearly the difference between a person who could be bought and a person who could not. And then he said the thing she had not let herself hope for. He said the eviction was withdrawn, not delayed, not conditioned on 90 days of perfect payments. Withdrawn. Renee did not understand at first. The words were too large for the chair she was sitting in. She said in a voice that came out smaller than she wanted, but the back rent. And Walter said the back rent was forgiven, that he had reviewed the account himself, and that a woman who had paid in full every month until the month her hours were cut, who held 2 jobs and raised a child alone and still stopped in the rain to save a cold animal, was not a woman his company was going to put on the street over a number dotma what, and that if anyone in his organization had a problem with that decision, they could bring it to him directly. The woman from the management company opened her mouth and then closed it. The man with the laptop typed something and stopped. Renee sat there and felt the cold, humiliated thing in her chest crack open, and what came out of it was not relief. Not yet. It was too big and too fast. To be relief, it was closer to the feeling of stepping off a ledge you have been standing on so long you forgot it was a ledge, the lurch, and then impossibly the ground. She put her hand over her mouth. She had promised herself she would not cry in this building, in front of these people, and she had been so sure she could keep that promise. And she could not. The tears came the way they come after you have held them too long, not gently. Walter did not reach for her. He understood that this was hers, that she had earned every second of it the hard way, and that the worst thing he could do now was make her thank him. He simply sat beside her while she came apart and put herself back together, and he slid a box of tissues an inch closer, and he waited, and the city went on past the glass behind them, and somewhere 8 years old and unaware, a child sat in a 3rd-grade classroom drawing a picture of a brown and white dog, not knowing that the dog had just saved her home. When Renee could speak, she did not say thank you the way Walter had feared, with the broken, self-erasing gratitude of the poor toward the rich. She wiped her face and she looked at him and she said, "Why?" And it was the right question and the only question, and Walter answered it honestly. He said, "Because you did something for nothing, and I had forgotten that people do that, and you reminded me, and a man who gets reminded of that and does nothing about it is not a man I want to be." He said, "You didn't save my dog to be saved back. I know that. That's exactly why I had to." He said, "The kindest thing I can do is make sure you never know how close it was, and I couldn't even give you that because you walked in that door, and I had to choose between your home and your never knowing, and I chose your home." He said, "I'm sorry it cost you the never knowing." And Renee, who understood pride better than almost anyone alive, understood what that apology meant, that he had wanted to protect even her ignorance, and could not, and was sorry, and she found that the cold thing in her chest was gone entirely now, and something warmer had taken its place. There is a kind of justice that does not need a courtroom. It works underneath the world, slow and patient, in a ledger no one can see, and it does not always pay. And when it pays, it rarely pays the way you expect. Renee had not stopped for the dog to be rewarded. If she had stopped for the reward, there would have been no reward, because the whole power of what she did lived in the fact that she expected nothing. That is the part that cannot be faked and cannot be bought, and that is the part that, on a cold Tuesday morning, a grieving man on the 14th floor finally let himself feel. The dog had run through a broken gate. The gate had been broken by nothing, by chance, by the ordinary disorder of the world, and the chance had carried a cold animal to the bottom of the one stairwell in the city where a woman would give up her bus and her child's breakfast to warm it. You can call that luck. Renee did not. Renee called it something else, quietly, the way she called most things, and kept it to herself. She went back to work that afternoon. She did not have to, she could have taken the day, but she did not know how to be a person who took the day, and, besides, she wanted her hands busy while her insides resettled. She told Gloria at the dental office that the downtown thing had gone all right, and Gloria, who had her own troubles and could not have known the size of the morning, said, "Good, I'm glad." And that was all. Renee folded other people's warm laundry that afternoon and did not feel for the first time in a month the cold metal in her stomach. The folder with her letter she kept. She did not throw it away. She put it in the drawer with Maya's school papers and her own few documents, not as a wound now, but as a record of something. The month the floor opened and then held, she did not tell Maya the truth of it, not the whole truth, not the part about the man and the eviction and the table on the 14th floor. A child should not have to know how close the edge had been. That evening, though, she made a real dinner, the kind they had not had in weeks, and she let Maya stay up past her bedtime, and when the girl asked, as she had been asking, whether the nice man's dog was happy now, Renee said yes, very happy. He's home with the man who loves him. And Maya said, the way children say the truest things by accident, I'm glad we helped him. And Renee held her daughter and said, me too, baby. Me too. And she meant it in a way the child would not understand for many years. Until she was grown, and her mother told her the whole story, and she finally understood what her mother had given away that morning and what had come back. Walter Hayes changed some things after that, not loudly. He was not a loud man. What he did was go back to his company and look at how the hardship appeals were handled, the cold stack of them, the managed and professional sympathy, and he found it was not good enough anymore, because now when he read back rent and a number and a date, he saw a kitchen and an egg bowl drying and a coat with a broken zipper, and he could not unsee it, and he did not want to. He put in place a thing he called, privately, the second look, where a person, an actual person, would call a tenant before a notice became final and simply ask what was going on, because he had learned at 58, far too late, that the file is true and the file is not the whole truth, and that the distance between those two things is exactly the distance where a child loses a home over a number. Some of the people who worked for him thought he had gone soft. He had not gone soft. He had simply, after a lifetime, started to see, and seeing changes what a person is willing to do. He kept in touch with Renee carefully in a way that never made her feel like a charity case, because he understood that the surest way to insult a woman like her was to keep paying her for the dog. He did not send money. He did something better and quieter. When he heard, months later, that the laundromat was closing, he made one phone call to a man he knew who ran the maintenance and cleaning contracts for an entire downtown building, and he did not say hire her as a favor. He said, I know a woman who is the hardest and most honest worker I have ever come across, and you would be a fool to let someone else get her first. And that was true, every word of it. And it was not charity, it was the plain recommendation of a man whose word carried weight, and Renee got a job that paid almost twice what she had been making, with hours that let her be home when Maya got off the bus. She did not know Walter had made the call. He made sure of that too. She thought she had earned it on her own. He had only opened a door. She was more than strong enough to walk through. A year later, Renee Carter signed a lease on a different apartment, 2 bedrooms instead of 1, in a building with a working entry light and a buzzer panel where every button buzzed, on a street with a row of young trees the city had planted the spring before. Maya got the bigger room. She painted it with her mother's help and a great deal of mess, a pale and hopeful yellow, and they hung her drawings on the walls with real frames from a discount store, and the drawing of the brown and white dog got the best spot, over the bed where the morning light would find it. Renee stood in the doorway of that room the day they finished and looked at her daughter asleep already, one arm thrown over the one-eyed rabbit she had not outgrown. And she felt the particular quiet of a thing that had been impossibly hard becoming, against all odds ordinary. Safe theirs. She still had the broken coat. She could afford a new one now, and she had bought one, a good one with a zipper that worked, but she kept the old one in the back of the closet, and she could not have told you exactly why, except that it was the coat she had been wearing the morning she stopped, the coat she had tucked a cold and trembling dog inside. And some part of her knew that the warmest thing she had ever done she had done in that broken coat, and you do not throw a thing like that away. Walter came to dinner once that second year, at Renee's invitation and not his suggestion, because by then they were something like friends, the unlikely kind, the kind that only happens when 2 people meet each other at the exact point where each has something, the other has lost the ability to feel. He brought the dog. Biscuit was older now, slower, grey coming into the brown and white muzzle, but the dog remembered. It came through Renee's new door and went straight to Maya as though no time had passed, and the girl, taller now, got down on the floor with it and laughed that bright laugh. And Walter Hayes stood in the doorway of a home he had once almost taken and watched a child love his dog. And he thought about his wife, who would have liked this woman, who would have understood exactly why he could not have signed that notice, and he felt, for the first time since the funeral, something that was not grief. It was close to peace. They ate at the kitchen table. The same table, Walter realized partway through the meal, that had held the notice the first night he came, the table he had seen the corner of and known. It held the roast chicken now, and a child's drawing spread out for show, and 3 people who by the ordinary cruelty of the world should never have sat down together. He did not say any of that. He was a careful man. Near the end, though, when Maya had gone to play with the dog and it was just the 2 adults at the table, with the last of the coffee going cold, Renee looked at him and said, "You know I would have done it for anyone's dog, not just yours." And Walter said, "I know, that's the whole reason it mattered." And Renee nodded, satisfied, because that was the thing she had needed him to understand, that she was not special, that she had only done the ordinary right thing, and that the ordinary right thing, done when no one was watching and nothing was promised, is the strongest force she knew of in a hard world. Have you ever wondered how many homes turn on a moment that small? A broken gate, a cold morning, a woman late for a bus who stops anyway. Think about the people who stop for you, the ones who help when there is nothing in it for them, and the ones you stop for, and how you never know, you cannot ever know, which small kindness is quietly holding up something enormous in a life you cannot see. Renee did not know. She found out by accident in a conference room on the worst and best morning of her life. Most kindness never gets the conference room. Most of it goes uncredited, unrewarded, unseen, into the ledger no one can read. She would have done it anyway. She did do it anyway. That is the whole point of her. Walter drove home that night through streets washed clean by an early rain, with his old dog asleep on the passenger seat beside him, and he thought about the second look, and the woman in the yellow-roomed apartment, and the hundreds of files still stacked on the 14th floor, each one a number and a date, and a kitchen he could not see, and he resolved. The way you resolve a thing in a car alone at night, to keep seeing for as long as he had left to see. He was not a young man. He did not have forever. What he had was this, the knowledge of what one cold morning had cost and what it had saved, and he meant to spend the rest of his time as a man who remembered that the file is true and the file is not the whole truth. And Renee, in the apartment with the working light, checked on her sleeping daughter one last time before bed and pulled the door not quite shut the way Maya liked it. A band of hallway light falling across the floor, and she stood for a moment in the quiet of a home that was hers, that no piece of paper could take. And over her daughter's bed in the soft dark hung a child's drawing of a brown and white dog, the dog that had come shivering to the bottom of a stairwell one cold morning and found, by chance or by something more, the one woman in the city who would stop. She turned off the hall light, the drawing went dark, the house held, and somewhere a gate that had once been broken had long since been fixed, but it had done its work, and the work was a family, asleep and safe in the warm.